So again, just I want to start off by thanking Shelley for putting this together. Shelley, it's awesome that your heart is such that you want to bring right information to people. We're living in a time now where information is wrong just all the time. The news and everything is filled with wrong information. So the point of today's the webinar today is to talk about what's really going on in the market, right? Is the market going to crash? Are we going to have a recession? Will the recession cause the market to crash? What is going on with interest rates and everything else? So probably we're going to have about 40 or 45 minutes worth of material, and then we will go ahead and do a question and answer slide. So a brief introduction for myself, because you guys don't know me. My name is Scott DiGregorio. I have been in the mortgage industry since the 90s. And I have been a featured mortgage expert on the Today Show and Tokyo News and all that good stuff. And I've been teaching and training and stuff also for about 20 years. So, and at my core, I am just a data geek. So you will probably see that as we go today. So, let's talk about the problem today. The problem today is that buyers and sellers everywhere are seeing information about this market crash. And the problem is that is what the headlines are saying. If you read the details, or if you're on YouTube and you watch the video, all of a sudden now it's nothing at all like what they're saying, right? Everything's in the fine print. The problem is the average person just isn't reading the fine print, and people are making misinformed decisions that they might really, really regret. I'm talking to people now that I'm thinking are, they didn't buy 2 years ago, 3 years ago when they could have. And now they're sitting in a situation where, house prices have gone up significantly, and they're in a bit of a spot with that. So anyway, that is a challenge. Hey, Shelley, how are you? You are still muted, Shelley. All right, I'll just keep going here. So, all right, let's now. Look, we're going to talk about two markets here today simultaneously. We're going to talk about the Detroit market, and we're going to talk about the Southwest Florida market. And I'm going to go back and forth with data. So the first thing I want to share with you guys has to do with this hurricane. There's a lot of misinformation about this hurricane, about it's going to crash the market, and it is just the opposite. So, and look, to be transparent with you guys, or vulnerable. My team and I were nervous too when that storm hit. I mean, I've lived through 2 other hurricanes, but I've never lived through something like Ian. In fact, I think that was the second or third worst hurricane in U.S. history. So for the most part, nobody had. So I went back and I looked at data. And what I did was I put together information on what were home price appreciations 1 year before a major storm, and what were they 1 year after a major storm. And it was mind-blowing what I found. So we've actually, a major storm is a Cat 4 or Cat 5. We had a couple of storms that hit that were a Cat 3. So we had Katrina in 05, Harvey in 17, Andrew in 92, and Charlie in 04. And as you could see, Katrina almost doubled, Harvey pretty much doubled, Andrew more than doubled, and Charlie went up by about 50%. If you do the average on this, home appreciation rates increased by 74% for the 1 year after a hurricane. And that might sound crazy to you, but if you think about it, everything in economics comes down to 2 things: supply and demand. Well, there's less supply because homes got damaged, and there's more demand because those homeowners now need a place to live. So major hurricanes, as a rule of thumb, lead to booms and do not lead to any gloom. Now, look, there's a lot of stuff going on with, inventories growing, and there's price reductions, and the media is kind of all wrapped up in this. So let's take a look at this, and let me start off by prefacing that it's all about perspective, right? Let's look at this, right? There were a lot of price drops here, but they've come down, and they're in line with where they were in 2020 and 2021. Which, by the way, was screaming hot, the 2 hottest housing markets in history. So as you can see in Cape Coral and Fort Myers, we're sitting at about 5%. And, it's interesting, right? Like, it is accurate to say that price drops have skyrocketed by 50%. That is a truthful, accurate statement. But really what that means is we've gone from 3% to about 4.5%. Yes, it's skyrocketing, but it's also just a slight increase, right? It's all perspective when you look at statistics. Now, if we look at the greater Detroit metro area, we're actually seeing a kind of a very similar trend and mimic between the last 3 years. I mean, 2021 and 2022 and 2020 all tracked very similarly. So as you can see, there's not a huge difference in the numbers. Now, in the Detroit area, right around COVID, it was next to nothing because the market got real hot everywhere there, but not a big difference there. Let's take a look at the sale to list ratio. So what this is how many homes, or how much did the homes sell for in comparison to what they were asking for it. So if somebody listed a home for $300,000 and sold a home for $300,000, that would be at this one mark over here. So as you can see, the sale to list ratio had gone up, but has actually dropped all the way, had gone up to absurd levels, and it dropped back down to where things were in 2020. And again, 2020 was a screaming hot market. So homes are still selling here in Southwest Florida in the 97.5% range. So if you list a home for $300,000, you're going to sell it for about 97.5% of that number, which is a very, very kind of stable and strong market. Let's take a look at Detroit. The Detroit area, we are also in the same general range. So you're a little bit below 97%. And yeah, you were sitting at maybe 98.5% during the last couple of years, but we're still in that general range, showing a lot of stability in the housing market compared to what it's been in the last couple of years. Now, the third and final piece of data I want to look at is inventory. And here in Lee County, inventory has quote unquote spiked. Right? What does that mean? So let's break down what this means first. So a balanced housing market, if you read kind of any analytics or books or anything, a balanced housing market is considered about 6 months worth of inventory. Some studies say 5, some say 6, but in that general range. So figure, 20 to 25 weeks of inventory. And as you can see at the beginning of 2020, that's what we were looking at. We were right at that balanced market part, which is where you should be. And then, of course, things started to heat up. And then during 21 and 22, it was really, really low. Now, towards the end of 22, again, the media is saying inventory spiked. And yes, we did go from 6 weeks to 20 weeks. And yes, that is a 300% increase, but we're still not at a balanced market. We're still in a seller's market. And as you can see, at the end of last year, that number shifted quite a bit down. So the talks of this pending housing bust coming and this big crash is just not there. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at Detroit and see what story that tells. So now, again, we see through most of 2020 and 2021, sitting right around that 8 to 10 week mark. Right now, we're at the end of 22, where you're sitting at probably a 12 or 13 week mark. So you're sitting at about 3 months of inventory. So what does that mean? Well, that explains why homes are selling for 96, 97% of asking price. That's what you would expect. As the weeks of supply of inventory grow, that number will start to come down, right? Inventory will put downward pricing pressure on. So that's not happening. So when I look at this data, I look at the way the media is reporting it. It's accurate what they're saying, but it's perspective. What I'm seeing when I look at this data and do a 3-year comparison is a lot of consistency and a very strong housing market. By the way, I meant to say to everybody that is in the meeting, if you have any questions, please go ahead and throw them in the chat room. Only Shelley and I will be able to see them, but I'll make sure that I answer all of them as we go into the Q&A session. So anyway, so that's what I'm seeing there. Now, let's talk about this, because the media for a while got very excited about all of the deals that are falling through in the market. And look, if you look at where it spiked in 2020, that was right when COVID hit, not surprising there. And it spiked again in the summer of 22. And, what that tells me is that these are high fear times, right? So COVID freaked everybody out because none of us have ever experienced anything like that. So a lot of people said, look, I'm just going to back out right now. Let me make sure, like, kind of see where things fall and settle. And then in the summer of 2022 is when interest rates were at the highest peak as well. So, I think there's a lot of explanation for that. And I also think that some of the fear comes from not sitting through something like this, right? Just watching those headlines and listening to, too many people, I think, are listening to friends and family members that maybe aren't subject matter experts on it. And it's causing a lot of fear and uncertainty. Now there's real fears. We'll talk about that with inflation and affordability and stuff. But anyway, I think a lot of this is really fear-based. Okay, let's keep going. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves, is there a problem with the housing market or is there a problem with the media? And I am firmly of the opinion it is the media. So I'm a big YouTube guy. So when I jump on YouTube, these are the types of headlines that I see. And I want to call your attention to the one on the bottom left, the big for sale sign with the guy in the bubble. That's a person that I follow pretty regularly. And what was interesting, that video is 13 minutes and 40 seconds long. And if you watched it in the last, I believe it was 17 seconds, and you guys could jump on YouTube and find it. He said, now, for those of you waiting for prices to reach pre-pandemic levels, good luck, because you are going against over 150 years of economic data. So think about that, right? The catch, the hook, the title is, it's over, the housing bubble just popped. And in the last little bit, he says the total opposite of that. And that's what I mean when I say so often the fine print, right? How many people don't get to that last little bit of time for him to say that? And as I go through and watch these videos and read these articles, time and time again, with zero exception, that is what I see every single time. Now, let's talk about how we can really predict the housing market. Well, I mentioned earlier, everything comes down to supply and demand. Well, let's look at the demand piece of that first. So the first thing you have to consider is first-time home buyers. And the reason why that is I'm in a stage of life now. I got two of my kids are in college, and my son is going to be done with high school here in another year and a half. So my wife and I are going into the empty nester stage. And if we were to choose to downsize our home, we're not going to move inventory, right? We're going to put one on, we're going to take one off. It's going to wash themselves out. But if my daughter, who's about to be 22, goes out and buys a house as a first-time home buyer, they are just taking the home off the market. So that's why there's a strong emphasis in looking at first-time home buyers. And to try to get a feel for first-time home buyers, we have to look at their average age, which is 33, and then go back in time 33 years and look at their birth rates. And what I'm doing here in these next couple slides is comparing our housing market today to where it was leading up to the crash, okay? So if we look at this chart here, you see that leading up to the crash, there was a precipitous 3-year drop in birth rates. In fact, 33 years before 2006 was 1973. And the Supreme Court just repealed something that was passed in 1973, which was Roe v. Wade. So Roe v. Wade passed. There was a precipitous drop in birth rates, and it dropped to a little bit north of about 3 million births a year, which you could see over on the side of the screen. Well, where we are now is we're sitting just below 4 million births a year, and we're going to be essentially at or above that number every year for the next 23 years. So when we look at the demand side of things, the demand's going to be strong for a long, long, long time. Now, birth rates 33 years ago in economic terms is referred to today as something called either household growth or household formations. And as you can see on the blue on your slide, it follows it perfectly. And this is directly from the Census Bureau. You could see the household growth, the household formation, dropped 3 years leading up to 2006 and then plateaued. So there is a perfect correlation between those two charts. And on the supply side of things, the annual completions is homes being built. So as you can see in 2005, household growth plummeted, dropped a fair amount, but they built more. And then in 2006, it really fell off, and yet they built more. So we were just building way too many homes. The builders were not following that. Well, If you look at where we are today, folks, it's the total opposite. We are not building anywhere near enough homes. I have another slide that shows that. So, and as you can see, again, perfectly mimicking that past slide, household growth is forecasted to just keep growing. The 2022 numbers aren't out yet. Now, another misconception that people have is that the housing crash happened overnight and this inventory shortage happened overnight. And that's why I wanted to include this. That white dotted line represents 1.5 million homes being built. And that is based on population growth in America. That is the average number of homes we should be building. And as you can see on that slide, for 12 years leading up to the crash, we were above that number. In fact, 4 years in a row, we actually broke records again and again and again. So that inventory surplus that was part of that housing crash had been coming for a long time. Well, let's look at where we are now. Now we have been below that line for 13 consecutive years. And for 6 of those 13 years, we broke records as well. So it is literally the polar opposite situation. It's almost as if you could take those blue and red ones, turn them upside down like Tetris and fit it in, and it would match. So it is, again, just a complete opposite scenario when we look at supply and demand, when we look at the amount of homes being built. And this is why inventory had skyrocketed during the crash and had plummeted in today's market. And as we saw in the earlier slides, that's not changing significantly. So the first reason why we just can't simply have a housing crash, and this is all national data, is because of the imbalance between supply and demand that rules everything. The second reason why we can't is because of the amount of equity. So this first slide here is Florida, Detroit's next. But what this is showing is the most recent data on this is as of Q1 of last year. So unfortunately, it's running about 3 quarters behind, and obviously the number's grown. But what this is saying is that the average person in Lee County that bought a house 5 years ago is sitting on $191,000 worth of equity. And you know, the question we have to ask ourselves with that, like, and let me pose this question to you. If you owned a house that was worth $491,000 and you owed $300,000 of it, can you think of one scenario that would lead to to you losing the house to foreclosure? I mean, there's plenty of reasons why you might sell, right? Job change, divorce, marriage, kids coming, kids leaving, whatever, health reasons, job transfers, etc. But there's not a scenario where you would lose the house to foreclosure when you're sitting on that much equity. And the numbers are much bigger in Lee County than they are in Detroit, but it tells the same story. The average person in Detroit is sitting on over $82,000 worth of equity if they bought 5 years ago, $182,000 10 years ago, and almost $18,000 30 years ago. So again, everybody is sitting in such a strong equity position. And, you know, I've run this on national levels and I've run this for different markets. I've done this this webinar and there is unwavering consistency with this. So the second reason why the housing market is drastically different than it was in the past is because the extreme amount of equity that people are sitting in. Now, this is the biggest reason. The biggest reason why we are nothing like 2006 and 8 is because my industry is no longer as stupid as it used to be. So every year, the Mortgage Bankers Association puts together this mortgage credit availability index. Basically, how easy is it to get a loan? Okay, and as you get to the higher on the chart, the easier it is. So as you can see, we were nearing the top of the chart, 900, leading up to the crash, and we are now sitting at about 120. Now, for those of you that don't remember how it works, let me express the stupidity of the mortgage industry in 2005. So here's the deal. In 2005, if you had a 500 credit score, you were unemployed, and you had an overdrawn bank account, you could buy a $300,000 home. And you could finance not 300, but 375,000. So you were able to finance 125%, literally put 75 grand in your pocket. And then when the payment came, you could pick your payments. It was literally called a pick-a-pay loan. So the mortgage payment came in and it was $2,500, and you could say, you know what? I think I want to pay $10 this month. and the other $2,490 would get added to the balance on your mortgage. I mean, it's amazing that product ever left the door. So if you were down and out financially in 2005, the smartest thing you could do would be to go out and buy 4 houses, literally put $300,000 in your pocket. And people did that with the thought that on top of putting that 300 grand in the pocket, they were going to sell it for even more. So everybody was not only in a break-even equity position, they were in a negative equity position with terrible, terrible, terrible mortgage products. So the mortgage industry has corrected itself. And I always like to point out that if you look in that blue line, there's a dip that happened pretty recently here on the right side of your screen. And that I always like to point out that was COVID. COVID did have an impact on tightening up mortgage guidelines. The details of that are for another webinar, but I wanted to point that out to you. So now you can't talk about risk in the industry without talking about borrower risk versus product risk. And I just laid out a scenario that explains that it was, and this chart shows it, that it was product risk in the red that really was the culprit of everything. And also in that chart, you can see right around 2015, the product risk completely vanished. And the reason for that is the sweeping legislation called the Dodd-Frank Act that was passed in 2011, finished getting kind of implemented in 2015. So you can now see that we are dramatically below what is deemed a reasonable lending standard. So if we look at the supply versus demand versus the equity position versus the mortgage industry, there's no way that we are in anything resembling a housing market like we were in back in the day. So that's the first thing I wanted to share with you guys. And again, I do see some questions coming in, which I appreciate. Just keep throwing them in there and I'll get to them at the end. Now, let's talk about interest rates, because again, there's a lot of kind of interesting things going on with interest rates. First and foremost, I won't get into the details of this. All I'll tell you is this: mortgage rates are controlled by something called bonds, mortgage-backed security bonds, and higher on the chart means interest rates got lower. One of the things that people are not understanding is that when the Federal Reserve's rates or hikes interest rates, they are not hiking mortgage rates. In fact, what they're doing is trying to fight inflation, and it's inflation that is affecting mortgages. So when the Fed makes an act to fight inflation, mortgage rates improve. And what I'm showing you on this chart is just that. Mortgage rates hit a high point this is October 21st. And that's when they raised rates, and then interest rates improved, and then they started to worsen. There was another rate hike, and then interest rates improved again. So interest rates have come down quite a bit, which again helps stimulate housing prices. And, you know, I don't want you guys to just take my word for it, right? So what I did was I got off of YouTube. I've got away from Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, and pulled up some articles from some reputable sources as to how they see the house market going. And Zillow had predicted an 11.6% increase. Fannie Mae predicted 10.8. Redfin predicted 7. NAR predicted 5.7, and CoreLogic predicted 6%. I had predicted that house prices last year, that these numbers go from 22 into 23, depending on the article. But I had predicted house prices would go up in the mid to high single digits last year, and that's absolutely what happened. I actually think it could be the same, possibly slightly higher this year. I'll talk more about that in a bit. But I just wanted to point out that I'm not completely on my own in thinking that things are going to, that home prices are going to keep going up. All right, now, what the heck is going on with interest rates? And damn it, are they going to start going down? Well, look, the next couple of slides, I want to talk about a couple of realities. Number one, we are going into a recession if we're not there now. And a recession is defined as 2 basically negative quarters of our economy. It's called the GDP, the gross domestic product. So, so every time the Fed consistently raises rates, like they're doing now, it leads to a recession. So what's on your screen now is a chart that goes back to 1955. And those vertical gray bars you see are recessionary periods. And as you can see, every single time the Fed raises rates, it causes a recession. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 recessions going back about 70 years, unwavering consistency. So the Fed's, there's a lot of talk in the news about the Fed, trying to do a soft landing, meaning they're going to fight the inflation and avoid a recession. There's just no historical data to give me any confidence that that's possible because it's never happened before. Now, the other thing that is being misreported in the media so much is that, hey, we're not in a recession because unemployment's low. Well, that's actually the opposite of the truth. And again, you can see this on this chart. Vertical bars are recessions, the squiggly line is unemployment. Unemployment is always very low when the recession starts, and then during the recession, it spikes. So again, this is going back to the 40s. So we're 75 years back again. We are consistent, actually more than that, close to 80. We are consistently seeing a trend that low unemployment rates lead to recession. All right. Now, one of the things that's good about recessions is that mortgage rates come down. So some of you guys watching may have remembered this term, quantitative easing. It was very, very popular during COVID. So here's the deal. One of the biggest movers of our economy is the housing market, because you got to think about new houses being built and all of the money and jobs that go with that, right? From the factories that make the 2x4s and the concrete, to the workers that install them, to the truckers that deliver them. It's just such a huge piece. So homes being built, sold, remodeled, all of this is the number 1 or 2 component of the economy. So when we're in a recession, the government's trying to jumpstart the economy. And the way they do that is they do quantitative easing, which is where they buy those mortgage-backed security bonds that I mentioned and push interest rates down. So as you can see, the recession in 1980, rates dropped down from 16 to 11.75. This is back when rates were insanity. Then they spiked up to 18, hit another recession, dropped down to 13. They dropped. In fact, every single time, and you can see kind of that last one there with COVID, every single time we're in a recession, mortgage rates drop. Well, think about it. When mortgage rates are dropping, what happens to home prices? Well, people could afford more, right? Because most people come to me and they say, Scott, I want my mortgage payment to be less than X dollars per month. Well, at 7%, that gets you one figure. At 4%, that gets you a much bigger figure. So what this next chart shows is just that, okay? House prices have never plummeted and generally go up, a lot of times substantially up, but generally up. I was kind of flat back in 1960, and then nothing but increases then. But housing always stays strong through recessions. Now, obviously on your screen, you see the one glaring exception in 2008 where house prices drop. But here's what I want you to realize. 2008 was a recession caused by a housing collapse, not the other way around. In fact, never in US history has a recession caused a housing collapse because of what I just mentioned with interest rates coming down. So when people hear recession, they go back to 2008 and the housing collapse, and I understand that it's logical, but when you look at it kind of, when you step back and look at it in a bigger picture, you'll see that that's just not the case. With the exception of 2008, I've explained why that is. Housing always stays strong through recessionary periods because of that drop in interest rates. Now, let's talk about interest rates. So this article came out in CNBC on August, 29th. And here, Fannie Mae predicts that interest rates are going to fall to 4.5% in 2023. Now, it's an interesting thing because some people are thinking, okay, great, Scott. Maybe you're thinking about buying a vacation home. Maybe you're thinking about getting another property, and you're thinking, okay, cool, I'm going to wait. Well, before you do that, let me share a couple other statistics with you. Number one, last year in America, we sold 5.95 million homes nationally. And what my team and I did was we looked at the median income and we looked at the median home price. And we were able to calculate that a 1% drop in interest rates is going to increase the number of people that can qualify for a median priced home in their area by 5 million. So a 1% drop in rates opens up the market to 5 million more buyers. Now, keep in mind, we sold under 6 million in all of last year. So that's literally doubling the pool. And we're not looking at dropping, they're not predicting interest rates to drop 1%. They're predicting interest rates drop 2.5%, because we're sitting somewhere in the 6.5, 7 range. So this is a substantial thing. In fact, I read a report from somewhere that said that 28 million Americans are looking to buy a house in 2023 and 2024. So the housing market, I predict, is going to get screaming hot once rates start to come down. And I don't think they have to come down to 4.5. I think rates get into the 5s and this market starts screaming hot. Definitely in Southwest Florida, definitely across the country. Look, there may be some exceptions to this, right? Like New York, California, there's a lot of people leaving those states. Texas is a very hot housing market. So when I say across America, I literally don't mean every single market in America. I just mean, on average in America. But in a market like Southwest Florida, I think it'll be Southwest Florida, Texas, et cetera. I think it'll be especially hot. Now, so one of the challenges that people are having is like, okay, Scott, that's great, but how do I kind of navigate not waiting? And this is something I put together for a client, and rates change all the time. Rates were about 7.5 when I did this. But what I was able to show this client is that he was buying a $500,000 house and putting down 20%. His payment was starting off at about $33.46 a month. And I was able to show him that if the predictions are correct and it does drop down to 4.5%, we're going to be able to refinance him and bring his payment down by $1,320 per month. So now we're looking at managing this higher payment for a 6 or 12-month window, not a 3, 5, or 10-year window, which is a drastically different thing. I think it's important for anybody considering doing something real estate wise in today's market. You almost need to look at this as a 2-step plan, which is the purchase, so you could secure the house before things go bonkers again, and then the refinance, so you could get yourself into a better long-term position. All right, now, all of that is well and good, but darn it, affordability is a damn problem for people. And I really get that. In my 27 years or whatever it is that I'm doing this, I'm now saying something to people I've never said before, which is, I'm really sorry you can't afford to live here. And I know the affordability issue is way bigger here in Southwest Florida for a lot of people than it is in the Detroit area. But no matter where you live in America, affordability is a big challenge. And, I'm just focusing on the housing piece of it. But let's be honest, everything is so much more expensive now. Inflation, gas, everything. So people's budgets are being pinched. In the fourth quarter of last year, credit card debt in America went up, and don't quote me on this exact number, but it was over $60 billion. So that's $20 billion a month. And this is just a sign of people's budget being stretched. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that the overwhelming majority of Americans are looking at their bottom line a lot closer today than they were in years past. And let's look at some solutions for that. So, long term, there's that refi, but how do we bridge that gap in the meantime? Well, one option is something called a seller paid buy down. So let me show you, and don't mind the purchase price. I realize this price is more relevant in Florida than in Detroit, but it's the same concept. So what this was I had a buyer that wanted to buy the house that was listed for this $899 figure, and his all-in payment was just under $5,200 a month, and he was uncomfortable with that. So he offered $809,000 for the house, $90,000 below. And, that would have saved them about $455 a month. The problem is the seller didn't even respond because it was such a lowball offer. So he came to me and I encouraged him to rewrite his offer. And I didn't encourage him to lower the price. Strangely enough, I encouraged him to raise the price. I encouraged him to offer $922, asking the seller to pay $23,000 in closing costs, which nets the seller the $899 he wanted. Okay. I was able to use that money to pay points and buy down his interest rate to 5%. And instead of him saving $455 with his lowball offer, he was able to save $586 by using this seller paid buy down strategy that that we use here at Neo, and get him into a 30-year fixed loan at 5%. Again, if rates drop down below that, a refi could make sense. But this was a way of getting that person into the house they wanted. Now, I'm also using this. Maybe somebody qualifies for $150,000 and they really need $200,000 to make, to buy something reasonable for them. We could use this same strategy to stretch their qualifying ability or range from that 150 up to that 200. In fact, if, going back to what's on your screen, I ran the numbers, they would have had to buy that house for $760,000 to have the same payment they got with the lower interest rate. So in this example, we were able to stretch the person's buying ability by $162,000, $163,000 to make it work. So if, maybe you're watching this or somebody who's watching this and they're just not quite there, this could be a strategy that could get them to an affordable spot to buy a home. If you do qualify for enough, this is a wonderful strategy to keep your monthly outlay as low as possible. Okay. Now, we have another strategy. And this strategy is a temporary one. And there's pros and cons to this versus the other one. So this particular strategy is similar in the sense that we're going to kind of ask the seller to pay about 2.5% to do what's called a temporary buy down. So the way this works is this. On a 2-1 buy down, your interest rate is reduced by 2% the first year and 1% the second year. So what you see here on your slide is on the right-hand side is the full interest rate of 7.5%. So what will happen is year one, the rate's 5.5%. Year two, it goes to 6.5%. And then for years 3 through 30, it goes to 7.5%. Now, you might think, Scott, why would I do this versus the other one? Well, on the first option, it's very hard to get the interest rate down a full 2%. Usually about 1 or 1.5% is the most you could do there. So this will give you often the lowest first year payment. On the negative side of this does go up where the other one doesn't. And for people that are less certain about the refi, like I study this stuff, so I, with 100% of my heart, believe it. But if somebody's uncertain about that, then the first option is better. But either way, there are these options out there to help manage this affordability situation that we have going on. So with that, I am going to kind of leave it at that. If somebody wants to schedule an appointment, they could use that QR code to do that. And let me answer some questions. So Wendy has a question, what about appraisals? In those situations, Wendy, the home would have to appraise for that higher figure. And, that's always something that has to be thought through on that solution is not the solution for every scenario, but it is definitely a good solution where we have to be mindful of which house we pick out. So really good question there. The other thing I would say on that note, which I think is important, has to do with kind of the psychology of buyers and sellers in this market. So when somebody's trying to sell their house, their mindset is, I got to get my house sold for the most money possible. When somebody's trying to buy a house, that's where their mindset is. But once that contract comes together, the buyer's mind goes to moving in And the seller's mind goes to doing whatever it is they're doing after they sell the house, move closer to the grandchildren, get out of the cold, downsize, upsize, right size, whatever. I find that renegotiating a contract in the event that an appraisal comes in low is dramatically easier because of their psychology journey, right? When they're in a different place. A lot more successful doing it then than it is when the offer is trying to get accepted. I just had a contract the other day. The buyer put in an offer price because his agent said this is what the thing is worth. The seller wouldn't accept it. They put in the offer at the asking price. The seller accepted it. The appraisal came in exactly at the initial offer, which the seller thought looked very suspicious, but of course wasn't. And the seller went ahead and dropped their price at that point. So I think the psychology shift is really helpful in that scenario. Certainly not going to fix it all, but in some cases it'll help. Michael has a question about, will rates drop suddenly, or will it be more of a gradual thing? And that's a really good question. The answer is it's going to be more of a gradual thing. The April inflation numbers are going to be reported May 10th. And I sometimes hate to make predictions that are so specific, but I firmly believe that the May 10th report is really going to drop the inflation numbers. And I think that's going to be the start of the downward trend of interest rates. And by the way, when I say downward trend, I don't mean like straight down, right? I mean, the way I like to describe it to people is imagine you're on a down escalator and you have a yo-yo. The yo-yo is going up and down, but the overall trend is downward. And I think that's generally how, interest rates work. And I think that that's the way it'll work this time. So I do think it'll be more of a gradual thing. Let's see if we have any other questions. Okay, there's one. Does the programs work? Do the programs work for all types of homes? So the programs we're talking about, these, with the buy downs and stuff, really aren't product or house specific. So any FHA, VA, USDA, conventional loan, this would work for jumbo loans, all of them. And it shouldn't have any impact on the houses or anything else of that nature. The trick of it is, like Wendy said, you need agents that understand it, like Shelley, that know how to properly structure and negotiate a deal. And we have to be mindful that, we're not walking into a very obvious appraisal problem there. So, okay, I do not see any other questions. All right, so look, folks, everybody, Shelley, thank you so much for your time today, everybody. We are going to be sending out a recording of this to everybody who attended, and those, we got quite a few calls from people that just had scheduling conflicts and they were unable to. So I want to thank everybody for being a part of this. Shelley, thank you so much for putting this together and allowing me to be a part of it. And if you have any questions about real estate in the markets, either in Florida or Michigan, give Shelley a call. She's, as you guys already know, just amazing. And anything finance related, go ahead and use that QR code and you can schedule an appointment with me. That'll give you direct access to my calendar. So folks, thank you so much. Have a great evening, and thanks for spending the time with me. Bye-bye.